Hi, so it's getting to be Christmas time, and when I say getting to be, don't come at me. I just mean like it's time to start thinking about the gifts that you're gonna get for people, okay? I feel like people go crazy if you even like think the word Christmas before Thanksgiving. I have not gotten my Christmas background up yet, okay? So chill. Okay, there are 3 gifts that you will get in my family at Christmas time. A video game, a book, or a board game. This is my family. Basically, ever since I went to college and, didn't see my family as much, Christmas kind of became like this time to play board games. Becca's home, everyone's gonna play board games. That's what it feels like. Now, I don't know, maybe they play board games all the time when I'm not there, but I have the impression that when I come home, it's like, let's whip out all the board games. Which makes sense, because there's someone that you haven't seen in a long time. It's a good way to like do something with the people that you haven't seen in a while, but like there's still the opportunity for conversation like between games and between turns and stuff. So it's a good way to catch up without just like feeling like you're just sitting in the living room talking for like a week and not doing anything else. It really is just a good time. We've always been, maybe not always, but like at least since I was in high school, my family's been decently into board games. Some of my dad's friends introduced us to Catan back when I was I was probably like 15 and my youngest brother was he would have been like 5 or 6. So like we got started early. But ever since then, it's just become like a thing that we do occasionally. And now over time, it has evolved into this holiday tradition. So I guess I wouldn't consider myself like a board game expert or anything, right? Go like watch ProZD if you want some like serious board game recommendations. But I would consider my family frequent casual board game players, if that makes sense. We do play board games a lot, but we just don't, we haven't gone super far down like, the D&D sort of like super complex rabbit hole of board games yet. So this list of games that we really enjoy, it's going to be split into 2 smaller lists. The first list is truly casual games, things that you can just play with friends who come over, or maybe if you have someone that you want to get a gift for that, maybe they kind of like board games, but they're not into like those really intense prep sort of games. The first list is going to be good for you. The second list is, I would consider them more involved games. They're, again, not quite as extreme as, Dungeons and Dragons. There's not like tons and tons of rules and lore for these games. Maybe something a little more complex than Clue. Love Clue, by the way, actually. But anyway, something more complex than that. If you know someone who wants to kind of like dip their foot into that, or if you know someone who likes, the setup of games, lots of pieces and the aesthetic of the different pieces, setting up the board, punching out all the different little cardboard bits. If you know someone who's into like that aspect of a game, these games are going to be good for you. The games I'm going to talk about are tried and true by my family, and hopefully the board gamer in your life will enjoy them as well. Okay, starting out with what I would consider the most casual game, but again, that is not meant as an insult. Sometimes you just need a game that has a very quick explanation and anyone can pick up on it easily. It's great for if you have friends over and maybe some of them aren't huge board gamers. And that game, we always call it caveman poetry, but it's actually poetry for Neanderthals is the real name. I discovered this game this year. We have a little group here that we have game nights with sometimes. And yeah, one of the game nights, someone brought out this game and it's super fun to me. I'm gonna see if I can do it. So the goal of this game is to tell your team a word, but you can just use words for hints, right? Your hints can just be one beat, like the way I talk right now. It's hard. In other words, it's kind of like password or taboo, if you really want to get like 90s with it, where, there's a word that you're trying to get your team to guess. But the limitation in caveman poetry, or poetry for Neanderthals, is that you are limited to words that are only 1 syllable. And if you say a word that is more than 1 syllable, there's a person sitting by you with this inflatable like caveman bat thing, and they'll hit you in the head if you mess up, and you lose a point and you can't get any points for that word. You have to move on to the next word. And within a time limit, you just try to get your team to guess as many words as possible. There's a 1-point word on the top of the card, and if you get that, you can also proceed to the 3-point word and try to get your team to guess an even harder word, but of course you risk accidentally saying something longer and losing the points that you had originally gained. So it's fun. It's a word association game, so it's really easy to explain to anyone who might be new to the game. I'm a linguist, so I have a really, really fun time with it. It's quick and easy to learn. You can probably play through a few rounds within like 10 minutes, so it's also a good game if you just like have a little awkward chunk of time and you want to fill it. You can just play a couple rounds of poetry for Neanderthals. The other thing about caveman poetry is that you are in teams with every other person, basically. So if you have a group of 6, right, the 2 people to my side are against me, and one of them is going to hit me in the head if I mess up. I think this works well, except for the fact that you need an even number of people. Now, I mean, like, if you don't care about it being like super fair, whatever, you're fine. But we always end up being like, oh yeah, I'll sit this one out because we need an even number. Like, we take that rule really seriously in the game night group that I've been playing with. So that's maybe a bit of a drawback. Maybe sometimes not everyone can play because of that even number restriction. But I guess that's kind of any game that has teams. If you really want it to be fair, you're obviously going to be limited to an even number of people. But yeah, overall, really, really good. It's a super casual game, but like super, super fun. The next game that I have is also like very easy to explain, not a super complex game, but again, very, very fun, and that is The Mind. I mentioned ProZD earlier. I actually found out about this game from him. And The Mind it's another good filler game. You can play through it pretty quickly, so again, it's good if you just have like 15 minutes to fill. The way The Mind works is there's a deck of cards labeled 1 through 100, and no matter how many people you're playing with, you distribute the cards between those players. So maybe there's 2 players, maybe there's 10 players, but everyone gets a certain amount of cards. Not all the cards will be distributed. So even if you have 10 players, not everyone's going to get 10 cards. With 10 players, maybe everyone gets like 6 cards, for example. The reason that adds a challenge is because the goal of this game is to place down all the cards in order from number 1 to 100 without speaking. So of course, if we evenly distributed all 100 cards, it would be very easy to lay those down without speaking. But instead, there are a few missing that did not get distributed. To keep it simple, let's say I'm playing with 2 people and we each only have like 10 cards. It's hard because maybe the first person lays down the number 1, they got lucky and they actually had a 1, but the next highest number I have might be 25. And I'm like, okay, do they have anything between 1 and 25? Or is that in the deck of cards that didn't get distributed? Different people play it differently, right? I believe the actual goal of the game is to get into a rhythm, and that way, you know, the X amount of time has passed, you can kind of figure out like, okay, it's my turn to play.
Oh, God! Oh!
Personally, I think in my family we do a bit of body language and facial expressions and a bit of, you know, are you sure? You know, kind of thing. That's pretty much how we play The Mind. Now, I guess that's probably against the rules, but to me that's way more entertaining than just getting into a rhythm, because once you get into the rhythm, I feel like it makes the game boring. Once everyone's kind of counting at the same tempo in their head, to me, it feels like an easy way out. Other people seem to feel that adding body language and facial expressions is an easy way out. So I guess it's whatever you think is more challenging, really, to play the game the way you want. Anyway, it's a really fun game. It can be played with any number of people, and it is way harder than it sounds to try to figure out what cards other people have and what cards are completely out of the game entirely, and try to get all the way from 1 to 100. It's a team game, which is also nice. You know, everyone is working together, so it's not a super competitive game because you either all lose together or you all win together, which is very, very satisfying. Also, parents, if you want your kids to play a game that requires them to not talk, get The Mind. My mom loves when we play The Mind because we go from playing Catan and being like, I wanted the sheep part. Are you kidding me? How do we win?
Connor,
I
I
know
know
you have.
now
You
I
have
should
weeks.
place
You have to
my
give it
settlement
to
on a 12.
to just. Like, I remember the year we got this, my mom was like, are you guys playing a game? What are you doing? And it's so quiet. So if you want either to get your kids to shut up, or if you want to give your mom a nice break where it's nice and quiet, check out The Mind. It's a nice, quiet, chill game. Okay, the next game I actually have on me. Most of the games that I've been talking about are at my parents' house, but this one we actually own, and that is Sagrada. I would consider this a slightly casual game. It's fairly quick and easy to explain, but it's more complex. It has a bit more of a setup, but honestly, the aesthetic alone is like, y'all, check out these dice. You get like these translucent, amazing dice. The whole game is, of course, based on the Sagrada Familia in Spain. So, you know, there's these windows that you place your dice in, and everything is just so beautiful and colorful. But anyway, the aesthetic doesn't make sense if I don't explain the rules. So the objective of this game, actually, let me show you what's the card. So the objective of this game is that everyone has a different card that tells you how you can place your dice. You put it in your little window, and basically each turn, the dice are rolled, and in turn order, you try to grab the dice you need to fill out your card. So for example, this one is limited to being a 6. It can be any color, but it needs to be a 6. So if I see that a 6 gets rolled, I want to grab it before someone else does. These, of course, limit your color. And one more restriction is that, for example, here we have a 1. I can't place a 1 directly next to another 1. Or I can't place a red directly next to another red. I can do diagonal, but I can't do horizontal and vertical. So there are a few restrictions that you need to follow in terms of playing your dice. But yeah, you're basically trying to fill out this card and get as many points as you can. And you know, like I said, this is a more complex game, so the way you get points varies each time. So for each game, 3 cards will be drawn that apply to everyone. So for example, in this game, we have row shade variety, which means that anyone who gets a row with all different numbers in that row, you get 5 points. Column shade variety, again, if you get all different numbers in each column, you get 4 points for each column that has all different numbers. And color variety, so if you have sets of one of each color anywhere, so every time you have yellow, green, blue, purple, and red all on the board, you get 4 points. These apply to everyone, and you also get your own individual goals that you try to match. So you're trying to like meet these goals that everyone is working towards, but you're also trying to reach your own individual goals, and of course, you're trying not to break the rules that are presented to you on your card. It's fun. It's kind of a game of luck, but it's also definitely a game of strategy and skill. Also just trying to get the dice before your family members do. It's a beautiful game, and the reason that I say this one is I would consider a bit more casual is because it's not hard to explain. Once you have the cards out in front of you, it's basically like match the color with the color on your card. Match the number with the number on your card. Like, it's not hard to explain. We even got my mom to play this, and she normally does not play board games with us. My mom played with us, and I think she wanted to play it again, which is a pretty big, that's high praise from my mom. So Sagrada's really good. I would consider this like the most complex casual game on the list. All right, so I skipped one of the more casual games because there was a chance that my camera was gonna die, and I was like, I just won't mention this game, and maybe I'll come back if I do have camera battery. I did not have camera battery, but I still want to go back and mention this game because I really enjoy this game. But another game that is, I would consider a bit more casual is Azul. Azul is a tile placement game for, I want to say 4 players, which by the way comes from the Spanish word azulejo, I think. So it's not blue like Azul, it's actually short for the word for tile. But anyway, Azul is really fun, very easy to like get the idea of what you're doing. So in Azul, everyone gets their own little square that you're gonna place your tiles on. And there are a bunch of tiles that go into this nice little like canvas bag. It's aesthetically a very nice game. And each turn, a number of tiles are drawn from the bag and they're placed in the middle in groups of 4. In order to gain tiles, you have to grab one of the groups of 4. So for example, let's say I want red tiles. Maybe there's a group of 4 that has 3 red tiles and 1 yellow tile with red flowers on it. I don't really want the yellow tile with red flowers on it, but I'm still probably gonna pick that group because I want the red tiles, right? So you kind of have to think strategically, what has the most benefit for me? Once you draw those tiles, you put them on your little board in front of you and line them up to be played. So you don't immediately get to put them on your board. You don't get to say, boom, got a red tile, one step closer. I mean, you are one step closer, but there's like more steps in the middle than you might think. So for example, if I want to play a red tile in the 4th row, I have to get 4 tiles in this first section on the left, 4 tiles all of the same color, in order for it to actually get pushed over and be counted towards my board. At the end of the game, when you count points, you get points for having completed rows up and down, completed rows left and right, and for having all 5, like if you have all 5 red tiles or all 5 black tiles with blue flowers, you get points for that. So as you're kind of playing, you have to decide, okay, this seems like what I have a lot of. I'm gonna maybe kind of lean into this strategy, or it doesn't look like anyone's really working on getting all the blue tiles, so maybe I'll work on getting all the blue tiles. So you have to kind of figure out your strategy as you're going. Everyone has the same looking board, so it's different from Sagrada, where everyone's kind of working towards different goals. And this one, everyone's working towards the same goal, but maybe because of the luck of the draw, people are taking different approaches. I would say it's even simpler to explain than Sagrada, I feel, because it's just like line up the tiles and then you get to place them on your board. Like, that's it. But we still really, really like Azul, and I would say a game of Azul normally doesn't last quite as long as Sagrada, so it's a nice, quick game. But yeah, like Eric and I went and saw some friends from high school who they play board games a good amount. But you know, this was a new game to them, and we were just like gonna play a game in the park. So we brought Azul because like it's a weighty game. It was kind of windy that day, and we were like, we don't want to bring anything with cards that are gonna blow away. So we brought Azul because the tiles, I guess they could blow away if you're like in a hurricane, but you know, they're not gonna blow away. So we brought Azul, and it's a nice game to play outside. And also, it was their first time playing it, and I think they beat us because like it's not hard to explain. And you kind of pick up on it as you're playing. And yeah, I would consider this a bit more strategic than some of the first games that I mentioned, but it's still pretty casual and easy to explain and pick up on fairly quickly. All right, let's get into the more involved games. So as I said, growing up, my brothers and we've been playing Catan since I was like a teenager. My youngest brother was still like basically like literally a child. So we're a big Catan family. I know this is a classic, so I won't spend too much time talking about Catan, but I will say it really is a good gateway board game. So again, if you know someone who wants to get into these more slightly complex games with a little more complex rules and a little bit more intricate setup, Catan is a really good jumping off point. Basically in this game, you are settling a new land. You start out with a completely randomized board. It does have a pretty intense setup, like I said. My brother almost always does the setup. He shuffles and randomizes these different hexagons. Some will provide wheat, some will provide sheep, like wool, or wood and brick. And then there's one that's a desert that provides nothing. So you set up this board with a bunch of resources, and then once again randomized are the numbers on each little hex. The numbers tell you what happens each time the dice are rolled. So for example, if there is a 6 on a wool, when we roll the dice, if we roll a 6, anyone who has settled on that wool hex gets some wool. And that's essentially the game. Everyone starts out with 2 settlements that you can place basically wherever you want with a few restrictions. And you know, you kind of try to maximize the resources that you're gonna get. Of course, you maybe don't want to place your first settlement on a 12, for example, because it's gonna be unlikely that you will get very many resources from that, unless you're my brother who can somehow always get things from 11s. Anyway, everyone takes turns rolling the dice. You get different resources from each dice roll, and you can use those resources to build more things. So for example, brick and wood will allow you to build a road and stretch out to eventually build another settlement, which requires brick, wood, sheep, and wheat. So you want a little bit of everything. And it does take a lot of strategy. I personally am not very great at this game, but I almost always get like fairly close to winning, so it's satisfying enough for me. But yeah, Settlers of Catan, it is a fun one. Sometimes it turns your family against each other and like people are kind of salty for like a day. But in general, it's a fun one. The original game is for 4 players, I believe, and there's an expansion pack that allows you to play up to 6 players. And the objective of the game is to get 10 victory points. So for each settlement that you place, you get 1 victory point. And eventually, again, with the resources that you gain, you can turn those settlements into cities, which are each worth 2 victory points. So you're just basically upgrading your domain, trying to get as many victory points as you can. I'd say playtime usually runs, honestly, probably like an hour, because, well, it depends on how many people you have playing. Normally we have 4 to 5 people playing, and I would say it normally takes us like at least 45 minutes. Sometimes like an hour and a half. It just depends on how competitive everyone is, how lucky the dice rolls are. If one person just had a really, really good strategy, maybe they'll knock out the game in like 30 minutes. But I would say this is a longer game. But I do think it's really good if you know someone who wants to get into that more sort of complex gaming. A game that is similar to Catan, but I would say a little less complex, is Carcassonne. Carcassonne is a kind of similar game where the goal of the game is basically to end with the largest domain, end with the most points. So in Carcassonne, there's not exactly a board. There are these tiles that have, again, different kinds of land on them. You start out with tiles that kind of form the shape of a river, which you can sort of randomize the way the river is shaped. And when it's your turn, you draw one of these tiles and play off of the existing river, which eventually expands into a bigger land. Each player starts with 10 meeple, which are these like little wooden people pieces. And as you're playing the little cardboard tiles and expanding the board, you can place down your meeple and gain points for what you lay each person on. So for example, there are tiles that have cities on them. And if I place a person in a city, I can get 2 points for each adjacent city tile, as long as the barriers of that city ultimately close. So if you get really greedy and try to expand like the biggest city, you might not be able to close it by the end of the game, and then you just, I think you only get half the points if you aren't able to close your city. Roads are kind of similar. You can lay a person on a road. You get a point for each tile that the road is touching. You can get points for farmland, which again has to be kind of blocked off by cities or roads, but as long as it's blocked off, you can get the, I believe again it's like 1 point for each farm tile, and you can get abbeys, which gets you 1 point for every surrounding tile regardless of what is on there. It's a fun game. It's also very strategic because if I, for example, have my person on a city, no one else can touch that city. It's mine. But if there are 2 cities that are really close to each other, maybe player A plays on this city, player B plays on this city, and player B tries to connect the 2 cities to steal some of A's points. Because if you end up sharing land or a city with someone else, you have to split those points with them. To me, it feels harder than Catan. The strategic elements feel more challenging than Catan, but the setup itself and the explanation of the rules are not that bad. So in a way it's more complex, and in a way it's less complex if you're familiar with Settlers of Catan. I would say it's just kind of like a different challenge. The game is apparently for 2 to 5 players. I guess we normally play it with all 5 of the people in my house who like board games. I'd say it lasts not as long as Catan unless you're playing with my dad, and then he will sit there and think about what he wants to do for like 8 years. It just depends on who you're playing with. But it can take, I'd say like 30 minutes to an hour depending on how many players and how much the people that you're playing with think. A similar game, which is pretty new for my family, is Tsuro. We got this, I think my brother got it for Christmas 2 years ago, and it's kind of similar to Carcassonne because it's a tile placement game. In Tsuro, you get these, I think, really nice looking pieces that represent you, and you put it on the edge of the board. On the edge of the board are these beginnings of paths. The tiles that you draw continue the path, and they kind of loop around and maybe lead to, as the game expands, they maybe lead to other tiles that have already been played. By placing these tiles and creating the paths, that's how you control your person's movement on the board. And the goal is basically to avoid letting these paths lead you back off the board. If you go back off the board, whether it's where you started or a completely different edge, you lose. So kind of the goal is to make yourself avoid falling off the edge, but also you can play in a way that might force another player to follow that path and they end up off the edge of the board. So you're kind of focused on yourself, but also you can potentially screw someone else over, which is kind of fun. I like the aesthetic. It's got these nice matte pieces. But in terms of explaining the rules, not too challenging, right? It's not, oh, you have to get this many victory points and this is worth this many points and blah, blah, blah. Like the setup is not too hard. It's not a lot to like keep track of. It's just don't fall off the edge of the board. But I would say in terms of strategy, for me, I would consider this a more advanced game. Maybe that's just because I'm not good at it though. You can play this with at least 5 or 6 players. I think you might be able to do 8. And at least for us, we're normally playing with about 4 or 5 people. It lasts us maybe 30 minutes. It's a pretty quick game. You know, it's fun to move your guy along the path. I feel like it's fairly different from a lot of other board games. I also put this on the more complex games list because there is a more complex version. So if you, for example, maybe you already know someone who enjoys Tsuro, you might look into getting them Tsuro Phoenix Rising, which is one of the sequels. There are many sequels to Tsuro, but the one that we've played is Tsuro Phoenix Rising, which adds on to the original game. So in this case, the tiles are all already on the board, but you flip them to another orientation to create a new path. And as you follow the paths you've created, if you pass by a lantern, you get to replace that lantern with a star token. And if you pass by a star token, you get to take that star token and count it as a victory point. It's really a matter of like kind of setting yourself up for success, right? If I pass this lantern, maybe I won't get a point for it, but I'm putting a star there and then he can get a point for it. You know, you kind of have to watch out for basically people taking victory points that you kind of earned for them that you wanted to earn for yourself. I'd say more complex than the original Tsuro, maybe a little more directly competitive, trying to make sure you're getting all the stars for yourself. But I do think it's really fun. I really like the aesthetic of it. You've got these like really nice looking lantern pieces, which I love. The stars are just like little wooden pieces, which are satisfying. So that's a fun one, especially if you know someone who likes Tsuro already. It's a good way to kind of like level up your Tsuro experience. Okay, one more game. I feel like my family is going to disagree with me for putting this on the list, but I'm going to consider this the most involved and like the most D&D adjacent game that anyone in my family owns. I believe my dad got this for my husband 2 or 3 years ago. And I feel like it's kind of funny because I want to say my dad got it as a gift and my dad wound up not enjoying the game that much, but I really like it. It's kind of like baby's first D&D. And I say that in a loving way because I really do enjoy this game. So in Call to Adventure, you get to kind of create a character, but they're randomized. You get to choose between a set of cards. And for example, let's say my character is an acolyte. So they get this special ability once per turn. If they fail a certain kind of challenge, they can pay a little bit of the diamond money to try again. Basically, these cards kind of tell you what your character is. So it kind of skips the character creation part of the D&D game, which again, like if you're into that, great. But this is good for me, like I have always been, maybe not always, but I've been interested in the idea of D&D for a while, but it's a lot of setup. I know I wouldn't want to DM a D&D game, and I don't feel like my brothers and my dad are like super into that stuff. Hey, I mean, if you are, I'm just saying, Christmas is here. But anyway, it's like, how do you get people to play a similar game without going through like all the investment of creating characters and all this stuff? This kind of takes out a lot of those steps that are maybe holding some people back from playing D&D. So you create a character and you have these sheets. On your sheet, I believe you start out on this neutral 2 points. And throughout the game, you can gain light points or you can gain dark points. And if you get too dark, I think you lose, basically. You just become like totally evil and you lose. Okay, to be completely honest, I had like originally moved, I went ahead and recorded my outro because my camera was gonna die, but I actually really enjoyed this game and I like talking about it. So I'm recording the rest of this on my phone because my camera died, but I'm still gonna talk about Call to Adventure. So the way you gain points is by doing these different quests, which are on these other cards. So for example, this quest is Find a Lost Child. The quest is going to take me 4, so I have to basically score at least 4 points to be successful. And if I am, I gain these attributes, or I can pick these ones at the bottom. This one, this blue thing with a white triangle on it, will get me a white card, which can sometimes gain me a white diamond if I play it later. So that's how I get my white diamond points and progress up the board. So to beat a quest and potentially get, different attributes and different cards, which can potentially obviously give you points, you roll dice. Again, just a good, very D&D feeling. So for example, this one I need to beat with a score of 4, and I can use, I think that's strength and magic, if I recall correctly. So depending on the character cards that I drew at the beginning and also different attributes that I've gained throughout the game, I will roll a base number of just these basic runes. I think you always get to roll at least 1, but again, it depends on your character. And then depending on how strong my character is, maybe I have 1 magic rune and we'll say 2 strength, for example. Each rune has, if it's related to an attribute, it has a 1 on one side, and if it has the symbol on the other side, like in this case the magic symbol, this counts for 2 points. I roll them, and this counts for 1 point. 1. This one counts for 2, so 3, 4. This one counts for 2, 5, 6, and this one counted for 1. It also, on the other side, could have counted for 0. So I would have beaten this quest because I scored over 4. So you're basically trying to get enough points to beat each quest. When you beat a quest, you receive different attributes. Maybe I gain strength by beating a quest, for example. By gaining strength or magic, that means on my next turn, I can say, I actually can pull 3 magic dice now, which really ups my odds of beating the boss. So I don't know how well I'm explaining this, but basically it's like a dungeon master in a box. It kind of walks you through the different enemies, the different quests. It helps you design your character. And honestly, I just like the dice. They look so cool. I like the kind of runic symbols that are going on. And it's fun to roll dice, man. It's a fun game. It's good for if you maybe want to get into something kind of like D&D, but it seems complex, or maybe you don't know someone who would be willing to DM. I really like this game. I feel like it's underrated in my family. Personally, I always want to play it, and I don't know, no one else seems to like the sort of role-playing element, I guess. But I really enjoy this game. It's for up to 4 players. You can even play it by yourself, actually. When Eric and I went on a little vacation sort of thing, we played it just the 2 of us, which is nice. I love a game that can be, still fun for 2 players. How long does it say the playtime is? Because for us, I feel like it's normally about an hour. Yeah, 30 to 60 minutes. So depending on how many people are playing, it's 30 to 60 minutes. There's actually even a co-op version that you can do. So it's a very flexible game. So if you know someone who wants to get into something really intensive like D&D, but they don't know where to start, I think this is a good way to kind of get them started. So Call to Adventure, it's a good one. All right, so these are just some of the board games that we enjoy playing every year. Obviously, some of them are more involved than others. Sometimes you just want a casual game, and sometimes you want to, get really invested and learn all these complex rules and have a complex setup. So whatever kind of game is your vibe, I hope you enjoy some of these games if you do try them out. I personally think they would all make really, really great gifts if you have someone in your life who likes board games, whether they're more of a casual gamer or someone who's more into the intense, involved sort of games. But thank you guys for watching. Happy holidays, happy gift shopping. And I hope you get to, spend some time playing board games and just having a good time with your family this year. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I put videos out every other Friday about music, media, linguistics, and whatever else is on my mind that week. Thanks so much for watching. See ya.